All right, welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. I'm one half of your show, Rich Baris, People's Pundit, and the belated Robert Barnes will be here in about 10-15 minutes. All right, listen, if you trying to push you guys over to Rumble, I see a lot of you still on YouTube. I love it. Fine. Hit the like button, subscribe if you don't subscribe, and then hit the notification bell. That'll let you know when we're going to go live. But definitely consider signing up on Rumble, on the People's Pundit YouTube Rumble channel. You just got me. And when you're there, give us those rumbles, those little plus signs. And right up here, you'll see the community for peoplespundit.locals.com. My pitches seem to be working. All right. So obviously, the larger the community grows, the bigger the 2022 midterm coverage will be. All right. We did something great for 2020, but we want to do something even bigger for 2022. If you're not growing, then you're not showing. It's that simple, and we are. So we have to bring more to you guys as we grow. So again, sign up right there. You'll see the locals link, the locals logo. That links you right to the community. Join the revolution in data journalism, where you'll get exclusive content, embargoed polls, and insight into how we design these polls, which we are doing right now. And I'm going to bring that up before I talk about. I'm going to use this time right before Robert jumps on to discuss this, because then I want to get into responding to a critic of mine, which I'm going to do, which I whacked at last week. And so far, I responded on social media. I have yet to see the response, but because you can't, Eli, you can't. But I'll get there. Just sit tight. I'm coming for you in a second. All right, on the public polling project, we are doing, it is the annual anniversary of the public polling project. This week, or last week, really, we raised the fastest or the most amount of money in the quickest amount of time that we have raised since the inception of the public polling project. So on the anniversary of its inception, the March poll, which seems all indications that we're going strong. Right now, we are at, let me see if I'll give you a live update here. All right, we are very, very close to filling this up. I want to say we're about 5 out of 6, so maybe a little low. You're almost on the dot. 4,976 out of the six goal. So if you haven't contributed to it and you'd like to see that, go ahead and do it. When you do, when you contribute, even if you're anonymous, in the comment section, leave us what you would like to focus on, because the greatest number of voices for a certain thing is how we add a question or a topic or a section to the questionnaire of the public polling project. The squeaky wheel, as my old dad used to say, the squeaky wheel, Richard, gets the oil. All right. So be squeaky about it. All right. And if you're contributing, which so far our contributor base this month, about 24% were new contributors, which is great, because the wider the donor base, the less burden it puts on those individuals who have been contributing. And if you already did contribute, we thank you for it, and consider sharing it far and wide if you haven't already. This questionnaire, like I said, is the anniversary questionnaire. So we are doing at least one section that we want to do annually. Right? The UFO stuff, you remember that? That we're parking to the side for now. It was prescient when we did it. Maybe we can find another place to fit it in if we're having like a slow issue month, although I don't know how that's going to happen moving into the silly season. Right now, trust in institutions is the annual index, basically, that we're going to have up. And we're talking about, for those on locals, you've seen it. I shared that doc with you. We added trust in agencies to trust in institutions. All right. So we had trust in institutions, much like Gallup, the Congress, the White House, the presidency, right? The institution of the presidency. What kind of faith do you have and trust do you have in these areas? Local police, news media, both national media and your local news outlets, and down the line, the military, the Supreme Court, right? Very much the same things that we have seen in Gallup. But we added Centers for Disease Control. We added big agencies. First, I looked up what are the largest agencies, but that wasn't really the defining trait that led to adding it. How much impact has it had in people's lives mattered. So while the CDC is actually not in the top, or at least it wasn't when I looked at the budgets, maybe that'll change after when they update this crazy stuff. The Department of Veterans Affairs was big. Department of Homeland Security, of course. And then all the departments of the military, but I did not do that because we already had the military entrusted in institutions. We added DHS. We added Border Patrol. We added the Department of Veteran Affairs. We added the Centers for Disease Control. Did I say that already? We added ATF, which someone on local suggested. I love that. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, the alphabet, the 3-letter agencies, National Security Agency. We added that. All right. So these agencies that may not be big by budget standards, or at least relative, because we know they still are ridiculously big, how much impact do they have directly on you, whether you know it or not, in your life? And we want to see people who have immense power. Are they trustworthy with that power? Does the American voter believe that they are trustworthy with that power? And then, of course, some of the things we have this year that we didn't have in the annual survey that started last year, we're doing the Registered Voter Economic Confidence Index. That's a monthly track that stays on the questionnaire. But we didn't have the 2022 generic ballot. We didn't have 2024 hypothetical matchups, right? So there are some areas where we're doing boosters in the coronavirus vaccine tracker. We didn't have boosters last year, and we've been doing that for the last several months. All in all, that questionnaire, the average interview time for the first questionnaire last year was about 9 minutes. Why average? Because some questions have logic, some do not. Most important voting issues is now on the questionnaire. It was not last year. If they choose cost of living or inflation, they get a follow-up question asking them specifically why they picked that question. And they get every single category that's on the CPI. Was it Joe Biden's skyrocketing cost of automobiles, or was it gas? Was it housing and shelter? Utilities, food and groceries, right? And then if they pick coronavirus, which I have something interesting to tell you, if they pick coronavirus to get a follow-up, do you think that pandemic policies are about right, or too strict, not strict enough, or just about right? We didn't have any of this last year, which needs to be on this questionnaire now as we move into an election season. So we're a little bit limited as what we could add to as new. This questionnaire, the average interview time so far after testing it was about 13 minutes. You know how I feel about that. 9 was already pushing. Something's got to go. I don't know what yet, but something has to go. We also have likely voter screens this year. We didn't have that last time. So maybe some of this, it's average because not everyone's going to get every single question, which boots up the interview time. Of course, if they answer to a question that warrants logic be applied, which means they're going to be funneled off to answer a follow-up. Maybe we'll see how it's going, but I would like to cut something at least. And the social bias indicators, I know they may seem completely useless. Just looking at them, they're not. And after New Jersey, after a year of polling post, or more than really, but a year of the public polling project and over a year since the 2020 election, we started those in the battlegrounds before 2020. Now we have national data on them as well, and also new state level data, but also district data. We add them to. They are providing useful information. We need to talk about that more with the locals community. What does it mean? Are there certain profiles that repeatedly set off these indicators? Which we call a signal in this. Is it throwing a signal? Are there profiles that repeatedly throw these signals? Eventually, we have to get more into it because, believe me, there are. And if you're going to make a huge polling mistake, this could be a major source of it. Now, I think something like the Baris poll, Robert and I have talked about this a lot. Baris refuses. They changed to online collection too, but they refuse to evolve when it comes to weighting. So they are the only poll that appears to show Joe Biden having a bump in his approval rating post the State of the Union address. When I saw that, folks, I just laughed. That was a typical response bias. You just spoke to more of Joe Biden's supporters. They wanted to participate. That's it. It's a very typical response bias. One of the first problems that polling industry has known about and recognized, or at least identified from the very beginning. And a poll like Baris that refuses to wait for certain, factors. I'm not, at this point, I don't need to tell them, let them just keep going. Joe Biden plus 11 in Pennsylvania. All right. After having a Trump plus 4, Joe Biden plus 6 in Florida. You're just talking to different people. That's it. All right. So, with that in mind, I want to move on to something else real quick. And, it probably is good that I saved this for last, because then Barnes, I know, was going to jump in. We have a lot of charts to show today to really show you by the numbers what are the odds that all of these ridiculous talks about these sanctions are going to cripple Russia, or I don't think Vladimir Putin calculated the impact that this will have on him. We have tons of charts to show you how ludicrous that nonsense talk is. But as I bring in Robert, I'm going to bring in Robert. He's here. He's ready to rock. As I bring in Robert, I want to bring in something. Robert, how you doing today, my friend? How you doing?
Good.
I got to bring this up real quick because it's been slapping back and forth at each other, I guess, on Twitter for days now. But I saw, and it started with me seeing your tweet. I saw Eli Lake basically, you know what? We're all just going to have to come to grips with the fact that we're in a Cold War with Russia and now China and probably India, and we're just going to have to deal with it. As if that wasn't insanity. As if we just all have to deal with a balancing coalition that we have no prayer to balance against. Let me explain. We have no prayer, no chance in God's green earth to beat that coalition in a Cold War or a regular war, whatever. That's number one. And I thought to myself that night, Robert, that these people really are this dumb. And I bring up John Mearsheimer, and I'm trying to teach people on Inside the Numbers. Apparently he sees it. I whack him in the tweet, and he makes this comment, about like I'm Mearsheimer cheerleading or something, right? Cheerleading for John Mearsheimer. Like, obviously Eli Lake did not study international relations in college, which I did, among other things. All right. Now, I went through the State Department's program, for crying out loud. And the running joke is people like him are the dumbest people on the planet. And if you can't defend your thesis like this guy who he's cheerleading for, Bruce Russett and the Democratic Peace, he got laughed out of the classroom and this is the thesis that democracies won't war with each other and don't start war as fast as others. And it's nonsense. He got laughed out because he skewed the math, decided what was going to define a war and what wasn't based on his need. It was like a very changing, fluid, arbitrary equation. It wasn't something that he defined. This is a war, and within these parameters, we're going to count all wars the same. That's not what he did. He got laughed out. He's a laughing stock of academia. So he decided, who are people more dumb than I am to sell this theory to? Politicians! Yes! So the joke is, if you can't defend your thesis in academia, that's okay. Go work for the State Department. And John Mearsheimer has never been seriously challenged. He has the strongest theories in international relations, and yet nobody listens to the man because they don't want to hear it, Robert. He's arguing that somehow if Russia was a democracy, that they would never have invaded Ukraine.
And there's two major flaws with that. I mean, one is whether we like it or not, as we'll go in through the data, Russia is a democracy. In other words, that the main reason why the main strength of Putin in Russia is his intense popularity. And there's reasons for it. We'll go through the charts that will explain why he's intensely popular. But Levada, which is the most independent pollster in Russia, the lead pollster for them is anti-Putin, has been trying to make this point to the West for a decade, which is that if you want to deal with Putin, you have to recognize his popularity and where it comes from, and you have to deal with that. And instead, there's Matthew Millerman and some others who study strategic empathy, who has taken a step back from being involved publicly because of how crazy everybody interpreted his explanations of things, which were not apologetics for things, but were just explanations of things. Is the importance of strategic empathy. But here's the problem. What if real strategic empathy, which means you try to put yourself in the other person's shoes for the purposes of your own strategic purposes so that you can explain what they've done and, most importantly, predict what they're going to do? But what if that act of strategic empathy would undermine the reason why you hate them? And as if you hate them based on a caricature, if strategic empathy requires you to dispatch that caricature, then do you continue to hate him irrationally? And so consequently, they've not really taught strategic empathy in the academy. And the school of thought you're describing with Mearsheimer is popularly recognized as realism, political realism in foreign policy. There's variations of it in the law, legal realism. The old joke in legal realism was, if you want to know what the judge is going to do, find out what he had for breakfast in the morning. And the joke, it was an extreme version of it. But the point was that frequently it was that random what a judge could do based on personal motivations, that if you studied the law wouldn't predict the answer for you. You needed to know the psychology, the politics, the preferences, the ideas, the mood, the mindset of the judge or decision maker. And the same in political realism just says the world is as it is. And we have to predict we have to explain it in those terms in order to be able to adequately and accurately predict it and defend ourselves. The criticisms of realism is that sometimes it doesn't have a clear moral compass, but it's not intended to. You impose your own moral compass that you want. The purpose of realism is to give you good analytics, to tell you, okay, here's what has happened. Here's likely why it happened. How does that tell us? And what does that tell us about what's going to happen? And it's like, calling Putin a dick. I mean, like, the irony right now, like, if you
I know where you're going.
If you looked at 3 nations in the world that you could say, you're worried about, or you want to, that has major oil resources: Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. Which of those 3 would you least likely to be at war with? Which of those 3 would you much rather be an ally with? Which of those 3 is an actual strategic threat to the world? And the Iran would be the least ally. Venezuela would be the second least ally. Russia would be the most likely ally. And yet we're such at war with Russia, the Biden administration is begging for oil from Iran and Venezuela. I mean, if that doesn't tell you how unrealistic from a realpolitik perspective, this means that even if you postulate the moral prerogatives that these Atlanticists have, their means of administering it is so disconnected from realpolitik that they cannot achieve their own supposed objectives by this mechanism and method and means. In particular, Putin is like, Putin's popularity, 2 things with Putin, like waging economic war on Russia, which is the current strategy. Part 1 is that, it'll hurt the oligarchs, and the oligarchs then will replace Putin. The problem with that is the old oligarchs no longer have power in Russia. They all left, because Putin's quid pro quo with them is you get to keep what you stole as long as you quit stealing. You pay about 10-12% flat tax. He thought Jerry Brown's flat tax was wonderful.
By the way, which all of these libertarians who love the flat tax, right? Yeah. All these flat tax advocates loved Vladimir Putin's flat tax. Do I need to bring up Dan Mitchell's columns on People's Pundit Daily praising Putin up and down years ago? This man's a political genius, up and down. And I'm not saying that to derail, or criticize Dan at all. He was telling the truth. I mean, the flat tax,
balanced budgets, more big reserves, buy lots of gold. Put enough money in military defense to be adequate for military defense, build up self-sufficiency in terms of fuel and food, partially what Trump was trying to do when he was president in terms of fuel, make America self-sufficient. Then we don't get involved in these stupid wars. Again, the best advocate of realpolitik from a foreign policy perspective was Donald Trump by a long mile. And it was his instincts. It wasn't like, Trump doesn't put it into like you're not going to get a policy paper out of it. You're not going to get a white paper out of it, but you'll just get his instinctual version, where he'll joke and say, hey, maybe we bomb the Ruskies and blame the Chinese and let them go to war. I mean, that's a little bit of realpolitik in a humorous extreme version of it, but
he called it principled realism. He called it principled realism. I mean, that's his doctrine, his foreign policy doctrine. We don't ever talk about it because we don't talk about that stuff anymore, Robert. We're like not smart enough to talk about this anymore like we used to when it came to Bush and Clinton, both Bushes, Clinton, right? We used to have these conversations from that point of view. We just don't.
Absolutely. I mean, The Intercept was discussing today the debate between the realist and the neocons. And they mention that there's a third school, but they say it's too small. And what they mean by that,
Constructivism,
it
basically,
being
and
too
yeah,
small, is just that the populist, principled realists are not well represented in academia and
not at all.
intelligentsia. But that's an indictment of academia and intelligentsia in the State Department. The John Quincy Adams founding fathers' interpretation of foreign policy, that we do not go searching abroad for monsters to destroy, has always been the most popular position within the
Yes.
American public.
Yeah.
And it's the most popular political position it had. I've been having conversations with House and Senate candidates over the last several weeks as they've been sort of unsettled by the media onslaught and hysteria. Fox News has never met a war they didn't like. There's a reason, folks, why Sean Hannity likes to wear that CIA pin while he was saying that tick-tock, Durham's coming, tick-tock. Why? To sucker Trump into not taking more aggressive action. Who recommended John Bolton to Donald Trump? Sean Hannity did. Sean Hannity Sean Hannity's an idiot. That was the reason why Roger Ailes picked him.
To kill Vladimir Putin, Robert? Somebody near Putin should kill him.
Yeah.
The stupidity of that statement?
Completely. It reflects two different things. The old oligarchy is gone, left Russia, and as long as they kept their head down and didn't keep stealing, they got to keep what they got, and the rest. A few of them decided to try to stick their head up with some Western backing, and they got an uninvited vacation to Siberia for a couple of years. So the new oligarchy is all been created by Putin. And Putin's quid pro quo was, I'll make you rich. In exchange, you make the state powerful. You make our society powerful. You make Russians rich and powerful. It was kind of like, it would be if Trump was in Russia, Putin is Russia's Trump. And that's why they're all loyal to him. You can squeeze them all you want. He's been telling them, don't buy vacation homes in Paris. Don't have your yachts in Monaco. But if you want to do it, your business. But, it's going to be at your risk. They are not in a position to take him out. They depend upon him for everything they have and ever will have.
Yeah.
But the real basis,
the nonsense of it. That's the nonsense of it, Robert. That's somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about. Even pretend
completely.
Like they're going to take this guy out.
It's just ludicrous. But the other reason is Putin has been consistently for 20 years the most popular politician within his own country of anybody in the world. He has never dropped below 60% approval. It's currently at 71% job approval.
71. Yep.
And the reason, we'll get into it, and we'll get into why. There's a reason why. And it's also why the Russians have no interest in a Western alliance or a Western alignment or a Western perspective. What we did in the 90s to Russia will never be forgotten. Anybody over the age of 30 still remembers. And that's why if you look at the polling data in Russia, the only people that the core of Putin's opposition, outside of some intelligentsia that are Western-oriented in St. Petersburg particularly, but some in Moscow, is kids under 30 who've grown up on TikTok and Instagram, who do not remember the 1990s, who think their life would be like the Parisian elites, but for Vladimir Putin. So those folks will be, lead the protest in the streets. They'll be on the social media objecting. Of course, thanks to the West, Putin doesn't have to worry about that anymore because social media is gone from Russia increasingly. They're doing him a favor. They don't understand that.
I'll tell you what, some people,
Netflix.
right?
He doesn't like America. He doesn't like Western culture in this way. He doesn't like the woke. I mean, why does a guy spend 15 minutes of his announcement of why he's going into Ukraine talking about culture? It's because of much more than Ukraine. It's because of his perception of the West's assault on Russian values. Like all this 3 genders, 4, like he said, in Russia, we'll always have 2 genders. If you listen to him, he talks about, man being head of the household. I mean, it's traditional cultural stuff. Even though he's known as being a soft parent towards his daughters, but that's true for every tough guy.
I was just going to say, every guy is soft on his daughter. I mean,
that's
at least
universal.
every father I know of. That's universal. I'm not sure that's uniquely Russian at all, man.
No,
I'm going to have the same problem.
Yeah, exactly. But but we'll go through all these charts that will show it. Putin is just intensely popular, and the refusal to recognize this is a strategic error on the West. Especially if you hate him, despise him, dislike him, distrust him, etc., you have to come to terms with who and what he is in order to know what strategic steps would be effective. And you should know, if you knew Russia's economy, You knew how the Russian oligarchy currently exists. You knew how that the real basis of Putin's appeal is his intense, almost martyr-like status amongst older Russians. Russians believed, and this was like back in 07 and 08, this would be admitted. You know, there were economists who wrote book about the rise of the Russian bear and the
before the new
petrostate.
Russian scare. Before the new Russian scare.
Yeah, yeah.
And
who
this was
acknowledged all
common
that.
knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't like a big secret. I mean, all the Navalny's and all the rest, none of those color revolutions was going to work in Russia because everybody over 40 knew what life was like before Putin. There's basic in Russian politics and when I met people over there in 06 and 07 and 08, and I sort of had the caricature of Putin that the West had. And then I realized every ordinary person loves the guy. You know, I would ask, well, who's your favorite author? And they would joke, oh, even Putin, more than Pushkin. I was like, you mean Pushkin, right? No, Putin. Everything was Putin because in Russia, there's pre-Putin and post-Putin. Yep. And that's kind of it economically.
Which we're going to show.
Yeah, we're going to go through these charts. These charts are off the
Just tell me which one you want first, because
do you pull up any of them, and I can explain the significance of them.
Yeah, some of them are PDFs, so in order for people to see them, I brought up I just uploaded them to the site, and we'll share them like that. Some of them are images, but before we show them, understand the sources of this information is not exactly Russian propaganda. The World Bank. Okay.
The World Bank, Statista, which gets its information almost exclusively from Western sources. This isn't the
World Bank,
the missionary. This isn't Pravda that we're getting this from.
That's right. Here is let's start with something everybody cares about, right? Whether you're an oligarch, even though you probably wall up your your premises, or you're an everyday Russian who lives in or outside of Moscow. Crime rates. People care about crime. This is a great example. And again, let me just, before I put this up, let me just say the answer, by the way, Robert, to Eli's question. If Russia was a democracy, would they have invaded Ukraine? You just put a hole in his democracy. Like the West doesn't want to view it as one. Like, so what does Russia do that the West doesn't do anymore, right? So you're accusing him of stealing elections. Was it a couple years ago, over 2 years ago now, when they did that, and I polled Russia. I'm not exactly a Russian pollster. The guy was 76%. The approval rating was 76%. He didn't have to steal an election. There would be no reason. All right. Putin has never ordered the army to surround the Capitol after an election for him. He never fenced out protesters like Joe Biden did. Right. Currently, Joe Biden has more political prisoners in the DC jail than Putin has. That's just the reality.
And it's his currency. He wants the election to be seen as legitimate because he wants he wants it to actually be legitimate because he wants them to know how popular he is, because that's his leverage on everybody else in Russia. I'm the guy that has he's the only one with more than 50% personal likability in Russia of all the public officials in Russia. There's a reason as well about to display.
And having the empathy that you were just talking about, which is the realists' major criticism of U.S. foreign policy over 100 years. Our inability to have the empathy to, not for the point of being, because immediately when you start doing it, the Eli Lakes of the world and the Atlantics of the world, they start, well, this guy's pro-Putin. You're doing it for a strategic advantage, dumbasses. You're not doing it to have.
It's smart enough to know why we went. You detailed on one of the last shows why we really went into the first Iraq war, but it's knowing
you saw that, huh?
Yes. Second order consequences. If you understand second order consequences, then you know that the replacing Hussein makes matters worse in Iraq.
Yeah.
Replacing Gaddafi makes matters worse in Libya. Replacing Assad makes matters worse in Syria. It's trying to put up your own grifter joke of a people in Afghanistan only invites and guarantees the Taliban gets the benefit of your weapons and money later. You understand these consequences. You understand that, if the State Department people in the 1960s had spent any time studying history, they would know there was only one small civilization, any civilization, period, that even at the peak of the Mongol Empire, defeated the Mongol Empire and kept them from dominating their country, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Only people in the whole world. China couldn't do it. Russians couldn't do it. Europeans couldn't do it. The Mideastern Emirates couldn't do it. None of them, only one. It was the people of Vietnam. So knowing that history, knew, okay, they're probably never going to take our dominance. Ask the French, but somehow we skipped that. So it's knowing realpolitik so that you know what is likely to happen, because based on what actions you take to improve your strategic decision making. And nothing better reveals that the Biden administration has no clue what it's doing than the fact that they're begging Iran and Venezuela for oil right now in order to wage war on Russia. I mean, this is one of the dumbest things ever, by their own definition of what their self-interest is. Or are they going to pretend Iran is a democracy now, a flourishing democracy? Is Venezuela a flourishing democracy? There's a place where you have stolen elections. So, I mean, it's just, now the other irony here, also is Russia one of the reasons why Putin did what he did is his belief that the United States election in 2020 was stolen. Said so.
Last week was absolutely an embarrassment to this country because he said it with such authority and was met with no pushback.
Yeah. And it's
as if the rest of the world knows it. We're the only ones who don't.
Exactly. And if you're Putin, you understand why it is he did. In his view, the United States became such a threat because here you have a guy come along who just says Russia should be an ally, not an adversary. China's our geopolitical adversary. Iran is a geopolitical adversary. Venezuela's ideology is an adversary, but Russia should not be. And what happens to them? First, I mean, all the people propagating the war at the core of every single group were the same people now pushing this war and have been for since 2014, frankly.
Collusion truthers.
Oh, yeah, Chalupa. You just go through the names of people. They're all connected to this Ukraine grift overwhelmingly. The number one donor to the Clinton Foundation, Ukrainians. The number one source of corruption and fraud for the Biden family, Ukraine. Not a coincidence.
Which they just kickstarted again, Robert.
Yeah.
The foundation.
Oh, of course. Yeah, he was like, oh, man, you can
How can people not put that together?
He's like, the grift is back.
It is. Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff,
what did he say? Like, people said, there's no reason. I was trying to give people, like, let's say we were in front of a big jury trial, and I was prosecuting the case saying Russia was not entitled to perceive Ukraine as an imminent threat. And Putin is on the other side, and we're presenting it to people who are just totally neutral, don't care, don't have a bone in the fight. What evidence would be presented? One piece of evidence would be the head of the House Intelligence Committee for the United States Congress during an impeachment effort of a president saying, we arm Ukraine so that they will fight Russia so that we don't have to fight them over here. They fight them over there. Said it right from Congress in an effort to impeach a president for trying to resist that policy. So
he's flush with arms dealer money. He's flush with Ukraine. You talk about oligarchs. Adam Schiff is rubbing elbows with arms dealers in Ukraine way before he was the impeachment manager for Donald Trump. And
it's
nobody
been a beautiful grip for the entire, not just the defense contractor industry,
perfectly normal corruption.
High-ranking Democrats across the board, plus a John McCain here and there, and a Lindsey Graham here and there.
Lindsey Graham.
I mean, that's the other thing Russia could point to. Not only Graham's latest idiocy, but saying in Ukraine to help fight to take on Russia and to wage a war on Russia on the ground with neo-Nazis behind him.
A year of offense with. Oh, by the way, and that's another thing.
What does that mean?
Nazis.
Year of offense.
The Nazi thing is Putin propaganda, according to these people.
I know it's insane. Even though you can find article after article after article from every range of publications the last 7 years, that I mean, this is not the Azov battalion was so bad in terms of neo-Nazis.
Right.
They were recruiting them from around the world. They were basically recreated the Taliban in Afghanistan and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in Ukraine. The CIA was doing the same thing, except they were recruiting aligned neo-Nazis from around the world rather than Islamic terrorists, but basically the same sociopathic people, just a slightly different coloration of their viewpoints and ideas. I mean, you can just look at their badges that they wear. It's like, just see if you see any similar images in
the
what
Jerusalem
they're using.
Post did a great, was it 07, 08, or not even, no, I'm sorry. What is it? It's 2022 now. I guess it was like 2000. It was right after the color revolution. And so it must have been like 15.
Yeah, every other year, somebody would run an expose because it was such an obvious story. But otherwise,
it was some
now
amazing work.
The what? Nazis? What are you talking about?
The same people who cared about fake Nazis for 4 years under Donald Trump that never existed are now all of a sudden completely silent in the face of real Nazis because, because there's a lot of money at stake. That's it. Yeah, let's show them these crime statistics.
Yeah.
You want to walk them through it? Let me pop it up.
Sure.
Here we go. Look at this
So
graph.
what happened? So you see at the beginning, I mean, to give people an idea, during the Soviet Union, you know, the nice thing about communism is they keep a monopoly on crime. So state does. But that means the ordinary crime rate, it's very hard to commit crime because everybody's equal. So how do you show up with a new TV? you know what I mean? And everybody's a spy in your building. So, you know, crime is hard to do. You know, the Russian mafia existed, but they were heavily suppressed and mostly dealt in the black market economy in the 70s and 80s, not in the kind of crime that impacts ordinary people. So not assaults, not burglaries, not robberies, not things like that. But in the 90s, you can see 1990 crime rate, 15 per 100,000 people, thereabouts. It skyrockets to over 30, and it would go back up and then back up again. And then when Putin comes in and starts to stabilize things he comes in 1999, and slowly but surely crime drops, and then it stayed down. And now, as you can tell, it's at a lower rate than it was at the end of the Soviet Union even. And he's kept it at a lower rate than since the end of the Soviet Union. So he's reduced it by more than 2/3, almost a 70% reduction in crime that he's been able to sustain for more than a decade and a half. And that gives you an idea. That's one of the key reasons why Russians love Putin. When he came in, they'd been experiencing ravaging crime impacting their everyday lives. You had the oligarchs with their private militias getting into private fights, getting into of gunfights. I mean, just right in the middle of the streets, hitting random people, rape, assault, burglary, robbery, all skyrocketing.
Yeah, it's like across the board,
across the board, just devastating
the Soviet
personal
Union.
crime. And
we're
basically
supposed to be managing it.
Yeah. And Putin came
so
in
everyone understands
and reduced it by more than 2/3. Just that achievement by itself would have made him popular, but we'll get into all the other achievements that he made. That again it's like time of Jesus. You can do pre-Putin and post-Putin, and you can see how horrific the stats we're getting and how all of them get extraordinarily better during Putin's era. And it's why he's intensely popular. And it's why you would know a color revolution and a coup would never work anyway if you had a strategic, realistic understanding of who Putin is.
And the most important issue in this country right now to voters, whether I'm polling California or I'm polling Ohio, it really doesn't matter, is inflation now. Cost of living and inflation is by far making leaps and bounds beyond jobs in the economy, generally speaking. Coronavirus has completely bottomed out into the single digits. This is the inflation rate in Russia. And I had to remove the spiral banner in the bottom so people could see the dates. Because again, pre-Putin, after, and mark that 1991 date. And it's really almost across the board with all of these charts. You had Poppy Bush basically say that it's our job to make sure that everything is stable in Russia. They didn't give a damn about the everyday person in Russia. They cared about the nuclear arsenal and basically raping and pillaging what was left of their military complex. That was what they were doing, folks.
I mean, it got so bad you had Russian generals trying to sell nuclear submarines to Colombian drug cartel.
Right. I can't believe you knew that.
I mean, the guy went over there and they just wanted a sub.
Attack helicopters.
Hey, you want one with nukes on it? You can take that. Yeah, can you imagine if Pablo in his war in Colombia had a couple of nuclear subs to go with him?
And by the way, the broker of that deal was a crazy Ukrainian from Kiev.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. He wasn't crazy. Exactly.
He was, man. And he came to
back. Ukraine has been the center of grift. It's been the center of a lot of things over the last 20 years. If people want to know where Russia was going, look at where Ukraine is now. Ukraine is now what they wanted to do to Russia, the poorest country in Europe, known for one of its biggest real exports, human trafficking. That's one of its biggest exports. Probably a coincidence the Clinton Foundation likes it so much.
In New York City, that guy came right out of Little Odessa. We had a major problem with organized crime in the 90s. That was U.S. made, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, this idea that you're anti-U.S. because you admit this stuff is ridiculous. The highest form of patriotism is calling out your own damn country when it's doing something morally wrong. This way you don't when it is time for might versus right, then you haven't sacrificed your moral high ground because you stuck to your principles. Barack Obama won in a landslide by arguing that we needed to get back to the country with the moral high ground and only use power when it really truly was justified. Of course, he was an utter and complete letdown. He was. I mean, he just stepped aside and let Clinton kill Gaddafi.
Zelensky, just a total fraud. I mean, Zelensky's more obvious because the guy was a comedian and he put a bunch of screenwriters and film producers. It's like a bad movie, this guy. But I always tell people I have no problem being on the moral high ground because the side I'm on for realpolitik policies that avoid unnecessary international entanglements and wars is the position of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson,
good where I am.
John Quincy, all of our founders. Whereas the position of being involved, the Ben Shapiro position, is on the side of George Soros, Hillary Clinton, Mitt Romney, all the neocons, the
FDR.
EU, Klaus Schwab. I'll take my side over that side any day of the week.
Yeah, and here is that inflation rate. Are you ready? Check this out, folks.
Exactly. And
I mean,
extraordinary
really,
that process.
It was going back up too.
They were getting brutalized, and then he gets it all the way down and stabilizes it. And you see that little spike? That little spike should have been much higher because that's when the economy collapsed and the ruble fell by 75%. And we'll get to some other data about how the real inflation rate is even lower for the ordinary Russian, and why this economic war on Russia will not likely impact the everyday budget of the ordinary Russian, even if the ruble collapses as bad as it did in 1998, because it collapsed badly in 1998, and yet he got it stable very quickly. There's a reason why for the real rate amongst ordinary Russians will be even less, and we'll get to the charts that point to that. And it's one of the big mistakes. What they're really doing is they're preventing the Russian rich from getting their Mercedes and Gucci handbags. It's high-end clothing, high-end cars, high-end luxury goods, French wines. Those are the things that are imported as consumer goods in Russia. There's some machinery and there's some chips and there's some things, but they've been working to replace a lot of that. The ordinary Russian, what are the two things that drive inflation? Fuel cost and food cost. And fuel cost, not just because of getting gas and heating your car and putting in the power plant, but also because it's so key to all production of manufacturing and distribution of goods. But what is Russia self-sufficient on? Like the ruble being less valuable than the dollar doesn't matter for the internal economy of Russia. It only matters for the imported goods are now much more expensive. That matters especially if those imported goods are gas and oil and food, because then that impacts
which we'll get into
exactly the ordinary person's budget. Again, if we had a realpolitik strategic approach, we would know that these sanctions are not only they're going to hurt ordinary Americans badly and potentially wreck the world economy in a range of ways they haven't predicted, but it's not even likely to achieve much in Russia, because even when Russia has spikes in inflation, most of that inflation is in goods the ordinary Russian doesn't buy on a regular basis.
So you're telling me that Greg Abbott's ban on vodka is not it's so ridiculous. Exactly. Oh man. Speaking of budgets,
we barely import any Russian vodka.
It's totally nuts. I mean,
almost all vodka is from France and Poland and other places, not from Russia. It's only about 1-2%. By the way, the best vodka is Russian vodka, Russian standard. But in fact, back when I was in Russia, I had an idea for. I was like, it's amazing how little.
You'll still get your goose and your Belvedere because that comes from the French Alps, so it doesn't matter.
Absolutely, you can get your Tito's. That's made in Austin. But I wanted to do a Russian vodka, which is I was going to call it Vlad's. If it's not Vlad's, it's not vodka.
That would sound like crazy.
I guess it's good I didn't have that business, because that business would have go woo with all these sanctions.
Yeah, no kidding. But look, speaking of budgets, here's the Russian debt to GDP ratio, and then we'll get into some of those PDFs, which really show you too how it's just when we show this stuff to you, think about like the presuppositions of their arguments, ladies and gentlemen. Because really, that's what we're going at here. The foundations of the foundational beliefs and presuppositions they're making, the arguments collapse when you realize they're incorrect. So
The
either there's
data
no
rebuts
legs
them.
to
There's
stand
a reason
on.
why
Right.
you're not seeing a lot of data from all this propaganda.
Yeah, where
And
are
it's
they?
because the
Where is
data,
it?
yeah, exactly. The data, and what I mean, the other thing is, if you're a conservative, the way Putin has managed Russia is how you would like the United States to be managed.
I was just gonna. Yeah, you should actually be
Lots of
jealous.
balanced
Look at this.
budgets, safe
Look.
reserves. Yeah, I mean, look at here's the debt to government debt as a percentage of their GDP. Again,
Yep.
1998. That's about when Putin comes into power. 1999. Look at how dramatically he reduces it and keeps it low all the way through. And that this happens no matter what hiccups. Even when he gets sanctioned heavy in 2014 and 2015,
Yeah.
he keeps
Georgia,
it low all
even.
the way through. This is why
Yep.
they're like, oh, Russians won't be able to pay certain debts, so on and so forth. Their external debt is far less than their internal reserves, so that they're not at risk. Unlike the United States economy, unlike a lot of Western economies, he has avoided debt. He understood he's an oil economy, so oil prices are going to go up and down. So what he did when oil prices were high, he stuck in surpluses. He didn't do what Venezuela did, which was spend it all, so that when oil went down, they were screwed. He was smart.
Yep.
He stockpiled it as reserves, stockpiled it as reserves. And a lot of those reserves, gold. I mean, one of the biggest buyers of gold the last 10 years, dear Vlad. So this is why he's in those reserves that they put sanctions on. Most of those reserves he wasn't dumb enough to have those sitting in the Fed. He didn't have those in the EU bank. He had those in China. He had those in India. He had those in Brazil. He had those in banks around the world. That money isn't there to hold up the ruble, because this is a guy who came into power right after the ruble went down by 80%. He understood how to use that to his benefit.
To leverage
because what happens when the ruble goes down? Why did Trump always want the dollar to go down more? And he was complaining about China devaluing their currency because it makes exports cheaper and more competitive in the foreign market.
Somebody should tell that to CNBC with their dumb headlines, Robert. I mean, aren't these people finance people?
Especially to have these people talk about the devaluation is going to kill them. It's like, hold on a second. When Putin came in was when there was a worse devaluation, and he led it, and he used the devaluation as a tool to improve domestic industry and to improve the domestic economy. Because again, he understood they don't import the things that cause ordinary people to feel extreme pain. They don't import fuel. They don't import food. And in fact, he's been building bigger and bigger and bigger surpluses. Also, not just in the reserves, but making sure developing oil. Unlike Biden shutting down the Keystone Pipeline, Putin's been looking for everywhere they can develop the wealth. And now it's even double bonus. He got BP and Shell and Exxon to help spend on a lot of money to develop some of that Russian oil. And now they're like, well, we quit. We forfeit our investment. Thanks. Thanks for the billion.
Good job. Hey, man. Thanks, guys. Guys. See you later. Nice doing business with you, dummies. I mean, this is, by the way, that chart, what people should see is that they did not have to assume any debt or any suffering as a share of their GDP after Georgia, which was a rather weak response. But I mean, after Crimea,
Crimea, the global financial crisis hit everybody. He didn't even when oil prices went down, even when global financial crisis hit, even when he's been sanctioned repeatedly after either Georgia or Ukraine, his debt ratio continued to go down and down and down. He was smart enough. He didn't borrow from the International Monetary Fund. He didn't borrow from the World Bank. He avoided that to as much as practicable possible. Avoided who invested and who made money in Russia, who they owed money to. And of course, now what are they saying? They're saying any country that sanctions us, our people and we'll pay you back in rubles.
And I'll tell you what,
value it all you want. You're going to be devaluing your
US.
own repayment.
Compare that to the U.S. during the financial crisis. All right. We doubled ours, ladies and gentlemen, doubled it basically overnight with a single vote, All right. Because they don't have the mechanisms we have here where that vote goes down because of conservatives trying to stand on their principles and on their really trying to stand on the laurels. Right. And then they get completely overwhelmed by bogus propaganda that says they're going to be responsible for the collapse of the global economy. So then they have to buckle. Right. And they did buckle. And after Crimea, which the world said was a unified response led by Barack Obama, not a blip. Not a single blip. And here's military spending. And I just want to say this before I put this up. People are just now realizing the Russians weren't fighting. They weren't really like going on a serious offensive in Ukraine. In the beginning, they were taking out military targets and encircling. All right,
they assumed that they would fight like we would. They had two major false premises.
That's right.
One is their whole pretext of the invasion was that this was to go back and recreate the Soviet Union, dominate Europe. If people paid attention to Putin's speeches, he thinks the Soviet Union was anti-Russian. And that was his whole Ukrainian speech. Look at this dumb decision. Look at this dumb decision. And then the Bolsheviks, he doesn't call it the Soviet Union, he calls it the Bolsheviks. Then the Bolsheviks did this dumb thing. And then they did this dumb thing. And then they did this dumb thing because they had their utopian vision. And what he's also underlying saying it is they're anti-Russian. They cared about their utopian vision for the world more than they cared about the Russian people.
That's more than they did the Russian people. Yeah,
they sacrificed the Russian people's interests for their idiotic utopian vision. He's deeply that's also been misunderstood.
Very true. Because he's a KGB. He's a former KGB agent who's an assassin. He's an assassin, Robert, and he wants to bring. I mean,
what I love about Russian assassins is their capacity. Like Ben Shapiro's out retweeting how Zelensky survived 3 different Russian assassin attempts. It's like it's amazing that these Russian assassins, they always come close, but they just can't seem to hit their target. It's like all the Russian poisonings. Like, oh, we know this was a Russian poisoning. Because it's this really dangerous poison, but it never killed anybody. It just poisons them and they survive. I was like, so these are great Russians. I was like, during the KGB days, when they killed you, you were dead. There was Aska Bandera, the former neo-Nazi of Western Ukraine. They tracked him down to Germany and whacked him right outside, but but most of the people they whacked, there was no track or trace of it. And the
Jews and the Russians, and the Russians, when they wanted you dead, man, you were dead. It's that simple. Are you kidding me? All of a sudden now, post-Soviet era, they're just like what? They're incompetent.
The only elections they can somehow they can't manipulate the Ukrainian elections, but they can the United States elections. I mean, this combination of but the key was the Russians are trained under Clausewitz. They've already tried this path out in Syria, which their goal is to use military, then do diplomacy, military a little bit more, a little more diplomacy. They keep going up the scale.
While you take away your opponent's ability to really engage in real combat.
Further, now you can fold now.
Traditional war.
But if I have to go a little further, you're going to have to fold more next time.
You're going to have to give more.
And it's going to keep escalating like that. And they're not shock and awe. So, I mean, it's like if the Russians, and it was amazing because Putin wasn't out to take over Ukraine in order to invade Poland and Latvia and everyone else. That was mistake number 1 made by the Fox News generals. And so if you're doing that, you go in full scale. One of the first things you do is you seal off the western border. You don't let stuff pour in across Poland in terms of weaponry and the rest. You shut it right down. They didn't do that. But that's because that was never his goal or objective. They've hardly even touched Western Ukraine. The second part was the belief in shock and awe, because that's been our strategy. I mean, our strategy in Belgrade was bomb the living hell out of them. Our strategy in Baghdad and Iraq was to bomb the living hell out of them. And he doesn't want mass civilian deaths for 2 reasons. One is just tactical. He doesn't want to use maximum military force because he wants to be able to leverage each escalation with a diplomatic alternative. And that doesn't work if he does everything first. That's part 1. And that's just understanding who he is. You can agree or disagree with it. Colonel McGregor was like, man, this is kind of pussy-ish. You should go
yeah.
That kind of thing. And that's the American mindset, because what we do is we just go full military objective. And once the military objective is achieved, then we come back to diplomacy. But we don't
declare victory. Basically.
In live time.
We declare premature victory. That's what we do. We declare premature victory.
But in Syria, they did the same thing. A lot of their strategies were the same: to seal off cities, slowly, steadily seal. Oh yeah, this is yes. I mean,
military spending.
Yeah, military spending. So it was a very high percentage, but you can see by the end of the 90s, they'd achieved much of what they wanted, and particularly in terms of real spending. That you were talking about $6 billion. Basically, Russia's military was gone. It was devastated, and in my view, very dangerously so for the rest of the world.
Destabilizing.
The neocons and the neoliberals saw the Russian bear as a threat, so they wanted to sort of kill it, and they were succeeding at killing it to a certain point. I mean, you're down to $5-6 billion being spent a year. That's not a serious military. That's a military that is going to sell nuclear subs to Colombian cartels.
Yeah, because they're not making their payroll, Robert. They weren't.
Exactly, but very much like Reagan in the 80s, Putin understood the twofold importance of defense spending. First was just to be able to have secure borders and have hard power capability. But the second was it builds up your domestic economy. You build up technology, you give people good jobs. This was the part of the brilliance of Reagan in '80, that a lot of good white collar jobs, a lot of good blue collar jobs were in the defense industry. Some of the best paying jobs were in the defense industry. Building up the defense industry would have, and this has been a long debate between different people on my side and the left. The left has always seen defense spending as just net negative, as for weapons you can never use and shouldn't ever use. But what they have failed to appreciate is the collateral. I mean, many of our best developments in technology have been spin-offs from military developments. So if you understand
without a doubt. Raytheon came up with the microwave, my friend. The microwave,
Absolutely.
guys. You wouldn't even have had a microwave if Raytheon didn't decide, what are we going to do with all these components, which refer, I think, for signal. And basically, they had all of this component that was for Second World War application, and they tasked this guy with figuring out what else to put this to. He had it in a chocolate bar in his pocket. And it melted when he had it next to the component. And he thought, oh, what the hell is this? And then he realized it, that other things were heating up. That's how we came up with the microwave. And that is, Robert is 100% right. The internet is a military invention, basically.
Started with DARPA. I mean, that's why Trump was big on defense spending and space spending. He understands they have immediate benefits of giving people really good jobs now. They have a direct benefit of being able to use hard power or exploratory development, but they also have great spinoffs. Many of the best technological creations in the last half century have come from the defense or space industry spinoffs.
Yeah.
And so Putin understood this. That's why he put so much of focus on rebuilding the defense industry as a key component, so that we still spend 4 times what Russia spends on the defense, but that's different than the U.S. spending 20 times what Russia spends, or 40 times, which was where it was by the end of the 1990s. So, and that's another reason why what does restoring military pride do? It restores the pride of large parts of the country itself.
Yeah, nationalism.
He understood the cultural benefit of it, that it was important.
Nationalism makes you stronger.
Exactly.
Not weaker.
Russians produce badass military recruiting ads. They're showing guys out with their pet bear, helping out their training, right? I mean, when people saw that go viral, they had a pet bear, a huge grizzly bear, who's helping lift something up so these two guys can train. Their advertising is real advertising compared. What are we doing? We're advertising about how we have trannies and men who pretend to be women.
It's unbelievable, my friend.
And we're multi-diverse. Does anybody see a U.S. recruiting ad versus a Russian military recruiting ad and think the Russians are like, good God, those scary Americans? And it's some of those people that have been busy training the Ukrainians. So good luck with that. But that's another part of why he's deeply popular. He understood what was important to the people, what was important to pride of the people, what was important to the safety of the people. Emphasize that in economic policy, political policy, military policy, spending policy, as well as cultural statements in support of the Orthodox Church, in support of the traditional family, in support of only 2 genders, while still being respectful of the very religious and racial diversity that is within Russia. I mean, it has a big Asian population, has a big Islamic population, has other populations within it. Being respectful of those while still protecting the Orthodox Church and their traditional cultural values.
And here's the poverty rate. Oh, and by the way, before I jump to that, let me just say, because a lot of people I know that listen to this will hear it later, about Putin's criticism of communism and the Bolshevik, which he refers to constantly as the Bolsheviks. That's it, the Bolsheviks. Nationalism. Thomas Narn hated nationalism, the heir to the communist school of in academia. He said that communism's greatest failure was nationalism. And, Ken Waltz in Man the State War brings that up as well. Like, nationalism is probably the biggest obstacle to leftist collectivism out there, because people will always choose nationalism over ideology, and it makes for stronger nations. That's why the left hates it as the way they do. There's nothing wrong with national. In fact, it's a strengthening force, not a weakening force. They just noted this. Oxford and others have done big studies on this. In periods of U.S. heightened nationalism. There have been it has resulted in long-term Republican Party identification, because people do nationalism necessarily takes you away from collectivism, especially U.S. nationalism. So they
also,
hate that.
nationalism tends to be very anti-war. The
Yeah, of
1920s, the
course,
peak
it's
of
you
Republican
first.
power was because it's sticking with American foundational beliefs, and only
America
self-defense
first.
wars
Yep.
are the wars that national pride will. And in fact, that's one of Putin's biggest criticisms, is that the Bolsheviks devalued Russians, devalued nationalism, and that was both a realpolitik mistake, and he doesn't agree with it as a matter of principle.
Domestically. And yeah, just right. Yeah, because they basically put it was at the expense of the Russian, the expansion of the ideology at the expense of the Russian people and their
And this is part
quality
of
of
why
life.
Trump recognized who Putin
Which I'll
was
put
and
this
realized
up.
this is,
Finish your
yeah,
thought.
but
Yeah.
look at this. So by the late 90s, but before this, during the Soviet Union, there wasn't really poverty in a traditional sense, in the sense that what communism did well, quote unquote, is that everybody was equally barely enough to survive. But but you didn't have homelessness, you didn't have starvation post Stalin, etc. So and then the reason why that context is important is they're used to low poverty. They're used to their basic needs being met, not necessarily in a happy way, but they're not starving, they're not without a home, they're not without heat, so on and so forth. Now,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
happens is you can see it even gets so bad, it's almost 50% at the time Putin comes in. And amongst certain working class communities, it was over 50%.
Yeah.
If you were
They were
rural,
devastated.
if you were small town, if you were elderly. And this is why when Putin came in, the biggest alternative to Putin, still the biggest alternative to Putin to this day, but it's small, much smaller. It's about half the size it was when he came in. What the Communist Party was about to get elected in 1999, because a lot of the older folks were like, screw this. This
We
is
need to go
worse than
back. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And Putin was like, just give me a chance. And as you can see, every single year, down poverty rate fall until it gets around 5%, and it's now below that. And he's kept it there steady no matter what happens. Global financial crisis happens, poverty stays low. Sanctions from Georgia, sanctions on Ukraine, poverty stays low.
Nothing.
It
Yep.
doesn't. It's irrelevant what's happening in the rest of the world. He structured the economy and society, and this is why there are people, particularly the elderly, will swear by Putin no matter what till the day they die.
That's
And
why
anyone
I'm
who
holding
believes
off on the
otherwise
poll till the end. I'm holding the poll till the end, so everyone can when they look at it, when they see what we're going to show them, they can say, well, that makes sense. If we would have started and led with it, people would be like, I can't understand, because all you believe or all you hear is this nonsense from Western corporate media, who's completely owned by corporations anyway. They wouldn't tell you the truth even if they wanted to, ladies and gentlemen. You read the Pfizer report, all right? They wouldn't. Did you read the report on both, frankly, Newsmax too? But Fox News was just horrible. They're not. You have John Roberts going off yelling about Putin shutting down certain independent media because he doesn't want the real story to be told, as opposed to what, John? A crooked, bankrupt system, bankrupt business model like we have in the West, where you take money from Pfizer, so much so that you're no longer allowed to report the truth on vaccines to the American people. Which one's actually worse, Robert? Which one?
Well,
I don't know anymore. I don't know anymore.
In Europe, they just banned RT altogether. In Russia, what they do is they just ban fake news. If you deliberately lie and spread fake news, it became a crime. All of a sudden, everybody, CNN, BBC, they're hitting the door.
But they can choose a certain handful of people to regulate that, which is based off of bunk. Anyone who's read the Project Veritas reports on People's Pundit Daily, for that matter, knows that's bunk. They never accused us of a single fake news story. The problem was that we provided a narrative which turned out to be true. By the way, we were right, and he who shall be named was wrong. Well, he who shall not be named was wrong. So the real sin here was not providing misinformation. It was providing good information. And banning RT, yeah, I get it. They're funded by Russia. But you have somebody like Peter Lavelle, who ran Crosstalk, which invited everyone from all walks of life, populists, libertarians, conservatives, progressives, whatever, corporatists, Democrats, whatever, all walk of life, to basically scream and have thorough debate at each other, all right, which is more American than anything I've seen on Fox News. All right, since Hannity and Combs, and even that was a little bit too structured for me. I like all out debate war, bro. All right, like jump in whenever you feel like someone's full of crap or lying or wrong, and that's what now the impact from this is actually very anti-liberal, because now you took out a show like that, which promoted more what it is, the principles of sound debate and free thinking and fighting for your ideas, or fighting for your point of view in the marketplace of ideas and competing for that point of view. Is there nothing more Western valued than that? And you took that out. It's like, it's just completely, the irony is over the top. Of
No
course.
doubt. I mean,
on there like
RT
that
platformed. Deep state people hated him because they platformed anti-war voices from the
Anti-war
libertarian right to
Yeah.
the populist left to the, everybody
right.
from Noam Chomsky to Pat Buchanan to Scott
That's
Horton to,
Yeah.
and they hated that fact about them. But I used to tell people, watch RT and see if you think they're as bad as BBC, or if they're
Or
bad as
CNN.
Canadian, or CNN,
or CNN, man,
NPR,
or
PBS,
MSNBC,
or
right?
any of these other ones. And they
Come
really,
on.
you knew what perspective they were coming from day one, but at the same time, they had more robust debate discussion than any of those. And notably, again, Putin didn't ban any media networks. He just said it's going to be a crime now if you lie in the media. Whereas in the West,
they
just banned them. I mean, DirecTV kicked them off. They just banned them. They didn't say, oh, you can't now do news if it's false, and we believe it's false. Instead, it's you can't exist, period. I mean, RT America's gone. All those programs that have been on for a long time, now over. A bunch of people.
But Al Jazeera's going strong, my friend.
Exactly.
Strong, pushing radical Islamists, some kind of hybrid of radical Islamist, Al Gore-like environment, climate change. It just
that's because remember Al Gore was connected to the sale of Al Jazeera all the way back. Of Al Jazeera.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's probably where my subconscious is doing that too. Here's the unemployment rate. Let's do the unemployment rate.
Yeah. So here again, and you can see that. And the two things with unemployment is, one is, of course, the economic material meaning it has, but also the everyday well-being, sense of safety, sense of security, sense of pride, sense of identity,
mobility.
Particularly whenever you see male unemployment spike in any community, you see all kinds of bad social consequences. Single parenthood rises, drug abuse rises, criminality rises, because you have men who are disconnected from their society.
Prostitution.
Yep, exactly. All of it. Here you see it dramatically spiked in the 90s. This was the so-called the brilliance of the Washington Consensus economic policy for Russia.
That's Bill Clinton, Herbert Walker Bush. Yep.
Exactly. Turned into a poor, the Clintons, you can see, were just salivating. They were about to get rich off the Russian bear when they left.
Yep.
That's why Hillary has never forgiven Putin for that. They had to work hard to steal all the rest of their money. It was about to be easy. But yeah, you can see it was up to double digits, and real unemployment probably higher, and unemployment in key sectors, working class men, et cetera, even higher, up in the 20s. I mean, basically depression level economics in Russia when Putin took over, and almost right away dramatically falls. Only has occasional spikes, and he's kept it at 5% or so most of his entire last 10 years. And
even the Great Recession, Robert, even during the global economic crisis,
it went a
little bit above 8%.
Where were we, Robert? 6 to 8. It never goes from 6 to 12 again. And then he gets right back down again. Has a little spike during the pandemic, but it's from 5 to 6. Not as bad as ours. Nowhere near as bad as ours. So this is why he has why there is a rational basis for people in Russia to like him, and why that support is real and unlikely to change anytime soon.
And speaking, it's the next slide. I didn't even do that on purpose. The suicide rate. Where's our suicide rates? They dramatically spiked during COVID. Everything from more traditional suicides to traffic-related deaths, which we're studying right now, which agencies and officials in these agencies absolutely attribute to what they refer to as pandemic-related stress. So they would do, because the drug abuse, numbers are climbing again immediately after Donald Trump takes office. By the way,
they call it lockdown-related stress.
Yeah, I mean, right. Well, right, because people were drinking.
They're going to call it pandemic. Because
Yeah.
they can't be honest and admit it's our intervention that caused these problems.
Yeah, that's because the virus itself, of course, did not do this. Our
It wasn't this,
reaction to the
oh God,
virus
there's
did it.
COVID. I better jump off a bridge.
I better jump off a bridge. There's a Arizona later. All right, that's not what was going on. People having lost their family businesses that they had for decades. Being the first son in your family line to lose the family restaurant. That'll cause you pretty quickly to stick a
Being
revolver
stuck
in your
at
throat.
home in constant isolation and inability
Yep.
to go outside for long
Yep.
periods of time. So I mean, just one thing after the next, after the next, after the next, drove people mad.
Yep.
But we'll see what
Here.
happened in Russia, and you
Here
see
it
it,
is.
and because men commit suicide at a higher rates, you see the
Much.
drop is even more dramatic amongst men. It goes from almost a rate of almost 100 per. I think it's per 1,000 or maybe 10,000, but it's as soon as he comes in, which is right at 2,000. Again, it's just steady declines, and to where it's almost a more than half. And how does that happen? Well, and this is a good indicator because suicide rates tell you the psychology of the community and the people, the sense of pride, the sense of future, the sense of goals, the sense of satisfaction, the sense of identification.
Yeah.
All of these
Health
things.
and well-being. Health and
Yes,
well-being.
it's
And
a
when
very good metric for that. And it's just another area where the data shows Russian people much happier, much better off by their own definition, by objective definitions, in dramatic, extraordinary ways under Putin.
And if
And
you
then,
have,
look, here's
if
somebody
you
who
have your basic
understands.
needs met, Robert, if you have your basic needs met,
Yeah.
and we'll go over that in a second, then that helps quite a bit, and especially when you're getting into these little global fights. But go ahead.
Well, I mean,
who's,
and like you look at here's somebody who understands the importance of self-sufficiency. So
yeah,
since 2000, I mean, they were already mostly self-sufficient, but there were major pockets where they were importing major key foodstuffs when Putin took over. Not now, and one of the key reasons is look at that sevenfold increase in organic agricultural land growth, and it was not organic foods necessarily. It means organic as in natural land growth for farming purposes in Russia in just the last 10 years. He's been building for their economy and society to be self-sufficient, for them not to be dependent on foreign bankers, for them not to be dependent on the IMF or the World Bank or foreign governments, for them not to be dependent on outsiders. And that's part of the economic data that shows how he went about doing so.
Yeah, and this is only one. We have a ton of them. That was, where is it? Organic farmland growth, food self-sufficiency by category. And again, just so people understand, you got some people make comments like this because they really have nothing that they can say in response to it. The idea that we're like doing this, to praise Vladimir Putin. Again, you're missing it. You're missing the big picture. It's very small-minded what some of you people think. You're very small-minded.
Empathetic,
yes,
because your ideology says you can't be.
That's
You're
right,
be
and it's a shame
lousy.
because you'll be defeated. You'll be defeated.
A lousy and dangerous diplomat. That's how you fail.
And we're gonna lose if we don't break this. Let me put this as clear as I can to you people. We're going to freaking lose because your level of ignorance is dangerous to this country and the society.
And those are the people who dominate the State Department.
It is
key aspects of the
don't
FBI,
let them dupe you.
Dominate the think tanks. Dominate the Fox News. They dominate these places, and they don't know what they're doing. And it's people who don't know what they're doing who are more dangerous. Yeah. So this is the degree of self-sufficiency in your core food products. And in every single group, you can see he's improved while he's been president. It's gone up, particularly with wheat towards the bottom. But in all of it, they basically have close to or over 100%. In other words, they don't need to import eggs. They don't need to import milk. They don't need to import meat. They don't need to import fish. They don't need to import wheat. They don't need to import critical grains. All the key things that go into your daily diet, they make themselves. And that means two things. They don't depend on others to give it to them, number one. But number two, it means when it comes to inflation prices, these inflation prices aren't going to go up because this is domestically produced. So this
is why their CPI isn't moving, Robert. That's a big part of why their CPI isn't moving, because if you look at ours right now, despite the stupidity you hear from Joe Biden, it is our food and our gas that is killing us right now. And I guess I must have gotten rid of those slides, but we went over them on the first What Are the Odds. The shortages with food, the percentage of people
They're going to
reporting
get a lot
shortages
worse
and price experiences. Right.
because Russia
And
produces so much wheat.
right.
Russia produces Ukraine is the second wheat producer, one of the top 5. Also, Russia produces for export these things because they produce more than they need. But the other aspect of it is Russia produces a lot of key fertilizers that go into the production of food in the first place. And you cut those down along with Belarus. So all of a sudden, all of these input costs, it's not just like we have the inflation of the direct cost.
Yeah.
We have the inflation of the input cost is going to get bad. And there you see, like in food products, what do you see? Even when Russia had these little spikes, like around different sanctions, on the regular inflation chart, you see it basically a flat line in terms of it just stuck with this within the same price range year after year after year, food products. So even when they had 15% inflation after the 2014 sanctions, that inflation was not in the ordinary Russian's budget. It's why Putin's polling ratings didn't drop or change much, because the fuel cost didn't move much and the food cost didn't move much. And those are the inflation drivers for the rest of the world. But you can sink the ruble all you want. It ain't going to change those core ingredients for the average Russian.
Which brings us, before we move on, to why, especially if you are a supporter of Donald Trump, you should be paying attention here, because Donald Trump wanted this for the U.S. And in fact, he had China by the you-know-what, by the short and curlies, until the pandemic leaked from a lab and changed everything. He had them in phase 2. They were on bended knee. And he became to realize, especially during the pandemic, Robert, we're not getting PPE we need. We're not getting ingredients for pharmaceuticals that we need. We're not rare minerals that Barack Obama had essentially banned from being mined out of our own ground that are used in defense applications. I mean, everything from, things that do impact the average person to things that impact national security. So it's not like you recognizing that is not cheerleading for Vladimir Putin. That's stupid.
To the realpolitik that's been missed here. The other reason why Trump wanted to ally with Russia is Russia's GDP is, about 2% of the world's GDP. And often you see that Obama and others would repeat that all the time.
Yep.
The problem is what they were missing in that is that Russia's also about 25 to 30% of the world's key resources. That's one of the key things Trump understood. So what are they missing? I had these people responding saying China's a shithole country. And I was like, I'm one of the biggest critics of China. They're not a shithole country, folks. They're number 1 in manufacturing now. They've already replaced us. And they're number 2 economy in the world. Which
happened, by the way, in a year and a half. That was their manufacturing sector under Donald Trump's tariffs and strategic trade strategy was crippling them.
Yeah.
They were being crippled.
They depend on 2 things. What does China need? To a certain degree, they need access to U.S. consumer markets for their manufactured goods. But the other thing what they're lacking, what is the reason for their whole Belt and Road initiative? What's their biggest thing they're missing? Inputs, natural resources. They don't have natural resource wealth. Who has tons of it? Russia. Who's their neighbor? Russia. Who have they? So Trump's view was cut, same thing Nixon did, but in reverse. Cut Russia off from China. Ally them with us, not with China. And that will be a significant hindrance to China's ability to dominate the world.
And we did the opposite,
We've
Robert.
done just the opposite. We have pushed Russia into the hands and loving arms of Xi in China. Number 1 winner from this conflict by far is China.
Absolutely. And India chose their side.
Yeah,
It was a few years ago. It was just a few years ago where Modi rolled out the red carpet for Donald Trump. He was greeted by massive crowds of people.
Remember those huge rallies of him walking
huge.
And think about it.
And I have a friend who's a reporter in India, and he said he had never ever seen a foreign leader, dignitary, nothing received like what he saw for Donald Trump. And it was basically this idea that Trump was different. He saw the world differently. India was constantly having to do this thing with Pakistan and China. And with Trump, they kind of knew where he stood, Robert, and they felt comfortable, aligning themselves with the United States that could separate Russia and China so they could keep their hatred for the Pakistanis and not have to worry about pissing off the Chinese.
Only
but
Joe Biden.
Here we are now.
could take that Asian continent with Russia, China, India, and Pakistan, 4 countries that have a long history of hostility to one another.
Hating
India and
each
Pakistan are fighting battles every other year. India has problems with China on a wide range of subjects.
He's the
China and
unifier,
Russia,
all right.
biggest shared border in the world, or one of the biggest. They have a history of problems and questions, thanks in large part to Nixon in the 1970s. So you look at that history, all 4 of them now united against the UN declaration, of even a watered down resolution critical of Russia, refusing to join in sanctions. We've 4, by the way, of the top 10 militaries in the world. We've united this area that had almost never been united.
Well,
That's
he promised to be the great unifier
of the Biden incompetence.
He promised to be the great unifier. He just didn't specify who he was going to unify.
He managed to unify the Pakistanis, the Indians, the Chinese, and the Russians. Which, by the way, collectively, their economy is bigger than ours.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. It's like, this idea, and this is like, the Shapiros, the Jonah Goldbergs, the Bill Cristols, the Max Boots, all of them. They act as if like Britain is still this great seafaring empire or something, who owns the East India Trading Company or some crap. They live in another era. You think, okay, so out of this deal, we definitely pushed Russia into the arms of China. And if we haven't lost them already, we're on the cusp of losing India, who's going to just basically put aside their nonsense with Pakistan in order to pick what they view to be the winning side. And in exchange, we get Sweden and what was the other one? Finland. So, whatever. At least we can line them up and they can throw snowballs at the Chinese, Robert. What the hell? It's not because they've been pacified by Western elitism. We're not even getting like Ragnar Lothbrok out of the mix. All right.
No,
we're getting
the Vikings are gone too. Instead, we're begging on our knees to the Iranians and the Venezuelans.
They're doing
Tell
that
me
right
how
now,
that makes any sense at all.
They're doing that right now, as a matter of fact. All of us are focused on Ukraine, and you're not talking about how the Iranians are, basically using our paper tiger. They're using the U.S. as a paper tiger to wipe their butt because they're going to get so much more. And by the way, the Biden administration, for losing the upper hand here, is blaming the Trump administration for throwing out the Iran nuclear deal. It has nothing to do with the special permits that Donald Trump basically removed. And he had not allowed our so-called allies that love us so much to go around our sanctions and sell Iran components and buy oil or trade them for oil, that are used in systems that should be banned under sanctions. So, Barack Obama and everyone did this. George W. Bush used to do it too. They would allow them to break our sanctions. Donald Trump said, that's counterproductive. I'm a common sense guy. We're not going to be doing that. I got no buddies who make millions off of this. So we're just going to go ahead and shut this down. And that hurt. Talk about crippled. That brought the Iranian oil export to an all-time low, because that was really always like this backdoor way of them, giving us one of these. It didn't matter. It was just Iran. It was on paper.
Is a legitimate. The other thing I always get a kick out of Ben Shapiro. It's like, so you think it's wrong to wage a preemptive war? You think it's wrong to wage war or militarily attack a country because they might be developing nuclear weapons? Right. Have you forgot about Israel? I mean, it's like, how do you forget that the defenses you're now attacking, saying that Russia has no right to, means Israel had no right to it and has no right to it. You're endangering Israel's safety by trying to attack Russia for what they did legally and politically. And if you think the example of what they're doing to the ordinary Russian is just fine, what happens when they decide to turn on those same individual sanctions on every Israeli, which could easily happen if there's a major power shift in the world's economic and financial and banking structures?
Which is coming.
These are people that are
continues, this is coming.
They're not serious people.
If this continues.
The Eli Lakes, the Ben Shapiros, they're not serious people because they don't understand the world. And that's how they keep screwing it up. That's like Jordan Peterson had Robert Kagan on. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not taking any information or advice or recommendations from a guy who still thinks the Iraqi wars were both great. I mean, we have,
and I keep hearing that comparison. By the way, I saw somebody. It was a blue checker lob at me and you on Twitter. It may have been Eli. That, well, you guys oppose the Iraq War, but you see nothing wrong with Russia invading Ukraine. Dummy, Iraq is not on our western border. This is a real politique issue.
Exactly. It's not a matter of apologetics. It's a matter of reality. So there are legal grounds Russia could invade. I have a lot of criticisms of Russia invade. I don't think Ukraine was that imminent of a threat. I don't think that they can achieve so easily. And this was Clausewitz's point, the fog of war, the uncertainty of war, things go sideways. So I have skepticism about using military means to achieve any political objective. But from a realpolitik perspective, continuing to wage war on Russia is simply not in our self-interest, and it's not within any larger principled set of interest either. And so it's just foolish politics, foolish policy that's going to backfire, just like Iraq, Syria, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Serbia, and Afghanistan, and all of our other screw-ups in the last half century.
As if there's not all of these other examples to look at.
How many?
I don't want to use
the worst
word,
resume in the history of man, and yet people are taking them at face value.
I don't want to use the word, but you must be mentally slow if you can't. If you can't,
these are people who did not qualify for the short bus to school when it comes to certain kinds of strategies.
These are some really, really
and it's
stupid
the incapacity of strategic empathy that is my view is the biggest curse. If you cannot understand your opponent, you ain't going to beat your opponent.
And you've got all of realist scholarship behind you on that, because they may disagree. Is realism, are nation states making these decisions? Are they choosing to be offensive for, to preserve their status quo and the balance of power? Or are they defensive? Those are arguments they make. Nobody seriously argues that it is our inability to see this, to see the world through everyone else's lens, to see each nation state through their eyes in an international state of anarchy. Everybody agrees. They all agree with that. That is our major problem. We are somehow, and again, I think America is an extraordinary nation. I am all about American exceptionalism.
I'm for
but that doesn't mean, Robert, that we're not,
I'm
arrogant.
Absolutely. I'm going to leave with this. I got to hop on a client meeting, but I agree with our founding fathers were right. Go back and read John Quincy Adams' speech to Congress in 1821. Yeah. We do, and he explains both the moral reasons and the practical reasons of this policy, which is we do not go abroad searching for monsters to destroy. Because in the end, if we fly our liberty under other people's banners, it is our liberty that will ultimately be lost. That was great wisdom. He was right then. He is right now. I'll side with them over George Soros and Hillary Clinton any day. Thanks, everybody.
Last thing before you go, Robert. Ukraine or Russia first? The poll. Which one before you go? Which one should I go to?
Zelensky's numbers? Either one. You can go to Zelensky's 23% approval rating, or look at what Putin's approval rating is in comparison.
All right. Good luck, my friend. See you soon.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. All right. I'm going to start with Zelensky's, and the reason why is because you can have some volatility here, where basically, people don't like him. Maybe the war comes and there's a little bit more love toward him. But you have to understand what this man promised coming in. And he was elected with an overwhelming mandate. It was a landslide. A landslide. He was viewed very much in the Trumpian light, where he's going to come out of nowhere, a non-politician, and he's going to take on the corruption of, you have some of the oligarchs on one side. You still had a lot of people surrounding him from the Poroshenko regime, which was the pro-Obama, Biden, Clinton group, and basically they just festered in his administration, even though it was their corruption that he ran against. And then he still does, whether you like it or not. There are some of these allies that the Russians, especially the Russian people, view were behind a lot of this, what they would call atrocities in eastern Ukraine against the people of the Donbass and other places where basically they were, a little rough. And he did not a lot about any of these promises. And you still, with the loss of Donald Trump especially, you still had a lot of people come back into the embassy in Kiev. Trump was unable to root out these people. Most of them were witnesses against him during the impeachment. They hated U.S. meddling in Ukrainian affairs. They viewed the embassy in Kiev as meddlers and corrupt meddlers. That's it. One of Maria Yovanovitch, one of the top, woe is me, crying crocodile tears during Trump's impeachment. She was just this poor woman who was really all about getting rid of corruption, until the mean man, Donald Trump, the chauvinist that he is, the misogynist that he is, basically went after her for being the saint in the State Department. Folks, nothing could be further from the truth. That woman she'll slice your throat in a heartbeat. The Ukrainians couldn't stand her, hated her guts. And now with all of this coming back, then they viewed Zelensky as someone who really did not keep his promises whatsoever. All right. So you have here, in general, you approve or do not approve the activities of the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, going back to June 2021. Right, trying to make nicey nice again with the Biden administration, right? But 52.7% did not approve. Pretty big numbers of undecideds here, difficult to say or refuse to answer, but overwhelmingly 34.1% was the strongest number he had. And as time went on, since he had been reelected, and as time or elected from the first, he has not been 29.3, then 28.2, and it just continued to crater. We don't have, numbers for him just yet in a state that the country is in right now as a pollster. I'm telling you that would be extremely difficult to get an accurate answer. So if you see any media outlet come out with something, Zelensky's approval rating has gone to this, you would maybe be able to reach, the more elitist Kiev population. That I don't know how you would poll that country at this point and get a legitimate answer, as opposed to how the Russian people feel. Look, years ago, when the State Department accused Vladimir Putin of winning his last election, we did a project and he was at 76%. A lot of other people who have decent records, and they're trustworthy. That poll all Eastern Europe in general have generally had Vladimir Putin nowhere below 60% ever, and often, more than not, in the high 60s and high 70s. So this is not a man who needed to steal the election. A lot of people say that this war at home is unpopular for him, and you have the Hannitys of the world saying whoever gets close to him, should basically kill him. Think about, and, 2 U.S. senators that basically say the same thing. Tom Tillis, he's got to go. He's got to die because he's a liar and a murderer. He invaded a country and he's killed women and children, and then he lied about it. Well, what about George W. Bush? You're based on that, you're giving Vladimir Putin a death sentence. What about Joe Biden, who just killed an entire family of Afghanis, pretending it was a strike against ISIS-K, including women and children, and then he lied about it? Lindsey Graham, someone should get close to him and kill Vladimir Putin. This is where Vladimir Putin is at home. This is what the Russian people feel about this. This week, 2 Russian pollsters, VT is IOM and FOM published. Whoops, it's a little bit delayed there. Come on. I don't want to go too far too soon here. All right. Published surveys showing that approximately 2/3 of the Russian public support the Kremlin's war in Ukraine. 2/3. This was 3 days ago. The independent Levada Center, which Western experts often cite as more reliable, has not yet released its data on the topic. That's true, and I'm curious to see what they think as well. Do know these other ones. However, its earlier research suggests that a large share of Russians may indeed be supportive of the military operation, as Moscow calls it, likely at least in part because of the state's portrayal of the tensions leading up to the conflict. The state's portrayal. If you know anyone who does live in this part of the world, then you know how the Russians feel about the Ukrainian army. You know how the Russians feel about Eastern Ukrainians, and you know how Eastern Ukrainians feel about Russians. The more reliable Western-sided pollster in Ukraine before this conflict started had identification split almost down the middle in Ukraine. 52% of Ukrainians wanted to identify with the West and ally with the West. 48% wanted to identify as Russian or Pan-Slavic and side more with Russia. Given the way that country is geographically and who is easier to reach and who is not, I think it's pretty safe to say that it's possible that Ukraine is majority pro-Slavic, pro-Russia. The presidency that we overthrew in the color revolution in 2014 was a pro-Russian democratically elected president. Petro Poroshenko was a CIA plant. The independent, right, we already got there. For example, negative attitudes towards Ukraine and blame toward the U.S. and NATO for the crisis there rose by about 10 percentage points in the week before Russia's February 24 invasion, as compared to mid-November. And President Vladimir Putin's rating followed suit. According to the February 17th to 21st Levada poll, 52% of Russians held a negative view of Ukraine, and only 35% held a positive view, versus 43 and 45 respectively 3 months earlier. The portion of respondents, or the percentage really of respondents, holding, quote, the U.S. and other NATO countries are responsible for heightened tensions in eastern Ukraine, rose from 50% in November to 60% in the third week of February. Meanwhile, Putin's approval rating grew by 8 percentage points from 63 in November to 71 in February. That's pretty much probably right along where we would track it. When we did that project, it was right after he had won re-election. And typically, even in this country, a president wins re-election, for instance, their approval rating goes up. So for him to be at 71% and then rise to around 76 after winning re-election is completely expected. The same Levada poll, incidentally, found that in the week before the invasion, Russians afraid that tensions between their country and the Ukraine could escalate in a war had reached 51% versus 47% who were unafraid. And the share of respondents who believed that tensions in eastern Ukraine could spark a war between the two neighbors had risen to its highest since 2015, right after the CIA organized the ouster of a democratically elected president, 45%. After Russia recognized Ukraine's breakaway, quote, People's Republics of Donetsk, and I'm not going to even try, the DNR and the LNR for short, and officially sent in troops on February 21st. But before the larger ongoing invasion, Levada's director, Denis Volkov, noted that Russian respondents' attitudes towards events in Ukraine had been years in the making. Quote, they have several approaches to understanding the conflict and what's happening more generally, he told the Medusa news site. First, everything is America's fault, America's and the West's. They are pressuring Ukraine, and Russia must intervene to help and defend our people there. A little bit of a blow to the Ukraine wants to westernize crowd. The Russian people are far closer to the Ukrainian people than you, Joe Biden, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, Tom Tillis, or Sean Hannity could ever be. You know better than them? These popular views are being reinforced by Moscow's latest restrictions on freedom of speech. Media outlets have been instructed to use only official Russian government sources for their reporting and, according to local journalists, to not describe what's happening in Ukraine as a war, invasion, or attack. Outlets unwilling to toe the official line have been shuttered. Listen. Have we never done that before? Was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Canada not, a few months ago, telling outlets they are not allowed to refer to Joe Biden as Brandon or any criticism of him as Let's Go Brandon? Was there not a report that just came out that Fox News, Newsmax, and a host of other news outlets in this country refuse to tell you the truth about the vaccine because they take money from pharmaceutical companies? So don't give me this moral high ground crap. At least Vladimir Putin isn't taking money from corporations and telling news outlets what they can and cannot report. I'm not saying either one of them is particularly right. I'm saying which one is worse. He's doing it for the benefit of his country and his regime. They're doing it for the benefit of their own financial interests. Which one is worse? Volkov's observations seem to be borne out by these new polling surveys, which say respondents believe, quote, special military operation, unquote, is being waged for the following reasons. In the first survey, to protect the Russian-speaking population in the Donbass and LNR, 26%. To prevent the placing of NATO bases in Ukraine, 20%. To demilitarize Ukraine, which is a stated goal of this. It's obviously the chief strategy of the Russian forces right now. To denazify Ukraine and change its political strategy, 7%. To change a regime unfriendly to Russia, 6%. To split up Ukraine and establish its influence in part of it, 4%. Now, there are up to 3 answers possible in the next survey. To secure Russia's borders, 60%. To protect and by the way, if my alternative, my analogy of the U.S. losing the Cold War and the Warsaw Pact refusing to dissolve, and then now Russia was, let's say, invading parts of Canada, or meddling, let's say meddling, and making like Alberta, right, pro-Russia. We would, and by the way, they were arming them across the border. So there could be like V2 rockets pointing at us from across Niagara Falls or something. All right. We would say this was a border, realpolitik, border, national security issue. 60% of the Russians said this was a border issue to secure borders. To protect the population, 58%. And by the way, those are the Russians speaking Russia identify. They do. They identify as Russian. It's like, unbelievably, these idiots in Western media will not acknowledge this. To prevent Ukraine's accession to NATO and the placing of NATO bases in Ukraine, 37%. To join Donbass in Russia, 20%. To change Ukraine's political system and place pro-Russian forces in power, 17%. To destroy Ukraine's sovereignty and join the territory of Ukraine to Russia, 8%. And 3% other. And that's it. And I will give you guys links to it. Actually, later I'll go on locals and I'll post them, because the bottom line is I put these up on the site for now because it was like sharing a PDF with you here would have been like this narrow. It would have been so small you would not have been able to see it. And I plan on deleting them after. I really don't want to keep them up on that site. So I'll put them up as PDFs in PDF uploaded format on locals right after this. And you guys can rifle through all of this yourself. All right, because we made some pretty powerful cases here today. And the fact is, I want you to remember what you heard here today. And every time you hear these people make these arguments, weigh them against the data that you saw today. When was the last time we had a president who had a 71% approval rating, ladies and gentlemen? When? When was the last time our unemployment rating wasn't dramatically impacted by our so-called allies making incredibly stupid economic decisions? When was the last time our inflation rate remained steady? The man is popular, and he's popular for a reason. Unfortunately, the U.S. just made a dramatic change in its foreign policy doctrine, its energy policies. They did it in a way that benefits Western elites, not in a way that benefits the American, not in a way that's vital to American national security, or in a way that benefits its population. For all of this talk about oligarchs, this, that, and the other thing, after going over all of these charts and comparing them to America, is it not true that American policymakers, whether they're in the executive branch, a president, or in the legislative branch, the Congress, the House and the Senate, or the judiciary for that matter, is it not true that policy dictated from these 3 branches has largely aimed at benefiting a sector of elites, the powerful but yet limited sector in the society? We talk about oligarchs, Russian oligarchs this, Russian oligarchs that. But that's just not what, not that, of course, that's not true. What I'm saying is, does this population domestically in the United States feel as good about how their government governs them than we see from the Russian people? The answer is no. And that's why we haven't had a president that popular since after 9/11. And that didn't last very long, did it? The point is not to do this to be pro-Vladimir Putin or pro-Russia. The point is reality. The point is to learn from our mistakes so we don't continue to make them. Over and over and over, the same dumb language out of people like Eli Lake. Same stupid claims out of people like Lindsey Graham. They are concerned about the welfare, the health and well-being of their class of society. They are not making these decisions because they care about how it will impact the whole of society. One more time, with a few minutes left to go. This whole thing in Ukraine is a scam. First, the Clintons had their foundation set up to rape and pillage that country, to pick it bare. Joe Biden, as the vice president of the United States under Barack Obama, after the CIA-backed, CIA-constructed color revolution, within a few months, Joe Biden is over there saying, we're going to give you billions of dollars, but you're going to have to invest that in the sectors we tell you to invest it in. And by the way, a big one of those is energy. Joe Biden's son and his brother are two, but not alone, of a bunch of Western elites and their friends and their family members flooding into that country with no experience in that part of the world, getting paid ridiculous amounts of money, all with connections to the energy sector. Do you think that's a coincidence? Donald Trump gets impeached over a phone call where Western media, you want to talk about fake news, Western media is clipping 500 words at a time out of the transcript to make it sound like something it's not. Was it really about Donald Trump doing something inappropriate, or was it the military and energy funding that was in their scam? What was he really threatening? Adam Schiff, chief impeachment manager, like I said before, the guy rubs elbows, holds fundraisers with, and hangs out with Ukrainian arms dealers. Now they get power back, and we're right back to this again. This dates back, really, to 2008. I mean, well, it really ramped up. For those of you who say NATO was not, Ukraine becoming part of NATO is not that big of a deal, that's propaganda. Okay. After the summit in 2008, the Russians came out of there, making it very clear they would not, by the way, NATO refused to say that Ukraine would not become part of NATO. In fact, the talks of it at that time made it sound like it was more likely than not. The Russians made it clear, we will take this as aggression. This is unacceptable to have NATO on our western border when the Warsaw Pact has been dissolved. This is aggression. And try to see it from their eyes. If they did this to us, you'd all be bitching too. You'd want the president to order 150,000 ground troops to the northern border to go into Alberta or any other part of Canada to liberate them from Russian interference. You would, and you know it. And if you're not willing to admit that to yourself, then you're being dishonest. And frankly, we can't afford this much stupidity anymore. We're beyond the ability to make mistakes and recover from them. We have simply made too many. We are not the favored horse here. Pentagon just released a report a year ago. We couldn't take a conventional war against another great power. Can't handle a two-front war. That's conventional. You think we can handle a Cold War with comparing their numbers to ours, even though our economy is larger? That's what you get when you rely on other people for critical infrastructure, for critical sectors, manufacturing, defense. You think we could take those three with the aid of what? Britain and France? We got a very, very limited amount of time to wake up from this madness. These same idiots who botched every other foreign policy crisis in our lifetime, we're going to listen to them? We simply don't have the capacity to make these mistakes anymore. We're running out of second chances. We don't have the treasure we once had. We don't have the resolve we once had. We don't have the labor capital we once had. Because the world convinced us, like fools, to destroy our supply chain. To wreck 11 million jobs. We just don't have it, folks. We don't have it. We have to be smarter. We have got to be smarter than this before it's too damn late. That's not hyperbolic. That's where we're at. Copeland would say we're doomed. Origins of Major War. So check it out. It's a great book. He would say we're doomed. We're too much on the decline. They're on the upswing. Unfortunately, the policymakers are trapped in this stupid thing. They're trapped in it and they can't get out. Barring their full removal, we're screwed. That's the reality. The system has to be completely, it's like they're like a cancer and they have to be excised. Because we've allowed, the truth is, if we're going to use the cancer analogy, we've allowed this to metastasize for decades. And we just kind of sat back complacent, thinking we're the great America. We can make one mistake after another. We can unjustly invade one country after another, reduce our treasury, reduce our military, expand the welfare state, and somehow get woke, by the way. Like Robert said, you think that's not a big deal? That they're stoic and masculine versus wokeness and stupidity? I should have seen this more when I was in the Army. I mean, many people, especially the older guys, did see it. When from first was Army of One, or be all you can be, to Army of One. And that would have been fine in and of itself if it didn't come with changes like this. All right, regular Army can take off their little garrison caps. Everyone's getting a black beret now. What about the Rangers? That was their beret. Oh, everybody's getting the black beret. It's poor Rangers who went through Ranger school. What the hell are you talking about? That is the beret of a Ranger. Oh, you'll get tan ones. You go tan ones. Everyone needs a participation trophy, okay? Everyone's getting a black beret. They were furious with that. Then came the stress cards. I'm sorry, recruit. Are you under too much stress during basic training? Please place your finger on the card. Let's see the reading. If your heart rate's up a little bit from me screaming at you, I'll let you go sit in the corner. You could take 5, recruit. Relaxin' Jackson was the first to do that. That's why we called it that. Relaxin' Jackson. But we're going to engage in a conflict with the freaking Spetsnaz? Are you serious? With a country who doesn't have problems with food supplies? Look at the Central Valley, with what's going on with water in the Central Valley. We're totally corrupt. We cannot fix that. Or at least people so far have not been able to fix it. It's a massive national security issue. Loads of our food come from that place. If we needed to, and we couldn't import any longer, would our government be able to put aside their corruption to get what's right for the country done? I don't have very much confidence in that. Do you? All right, with that in mind, it's 4 o'clock. All right, I'm going to kick rocks. Locals, let's continue that discussion on the questionnaire. Let's give everybody a chance to go over it and look at it. And 13 minutes seems like an awful lot to me. I will be sharing these PDFs with you. There's a lot of them, so I'm not going to put them all up at once. I'm going to drip them out, all right, for you guys to check out and see what we went over today, because it's important. And keep it all in the back of your mind when you hear these idiots. And, of course, follow Robert on Locals, Viva Barnes, law.locals.com with me. Don't forget to subscribe to the Rumble channel, People's Pundit on Rumble. While you're there, you see the Locals button. If you're watching on Rumbles right now, if you're not a member of the community, sign up. If you're not a supporter, you're a member. Consider supporting. Like I said, you'll get embargoed polls, exclusive stuff, but definitely you'll be able to see what we're doing right now. Having a hand, we debate how we're going to conduct these polls. 1-year anniversary of the Public Polling Project. If you haven't contributed, please consider doing so. If you have, share far and wide, because we're just about there. We had a very great run last week. Let's continue it, wrap it up so I can get this poll in the field. All right. What else? What else am I missing? I think that's just about it. Don't forget to send Laura and I pictures of you with your merchandise, whether you're wearing sweaters, shirts, whatever. We want to see it. And when you do, use the local support. And when you do, tell us, make sure to include whether or not we can share it or not. All right. Because we're going to do some, we got a couple, we're going to do some, when we get more, we're going to get like this little collage type of thing for the show. It'll be cool. So let us know whether we can or can't share it. We'd still like to see it even if you don't want us to share it with everybody. We would still like to look at it. It's always good that we get a chance to see you guys and support us so we can thank you for it. We know who we're thanking. All right, with that in mind, I'm out. Don't forget Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit on Wednesday, noon Eastern Standard Time. All right, more polling. A lot of polling this month, folks. I'll have an update for you on California. We wrapped it up, and I'll have an update. We'll share that. Some really stunning results. Stunning. The Hispanic shift continues. Biden suffering with the Hispanic vote. Where does it end? Where does it end? Where's the floor for Joe Biden with Hispanics? I don't know. We'll see, though, and we're going to talk about it on Inside the Numbers. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. What are the odds? Follow me on GETTR at People's Pundit. Follow Robert, of course, on Twitter at Barnes_Law. We'll see you soon, guys. We'll see you soon.
The lights that shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway, restless nights, coffee houses, clubs and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you, working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I'll see you in the morning light. you're just a dream away. Working my way,